My name is Dana Perez. My job title, I'm an assistant principal in Danbury Public Schools in Danbury, Connecticut. And I've been in education for 12 years, but I've been an assistant principal. I'm going on my fourth year as an assistant principal. Prior to that, I was a school counselor. So, as an assistant principal, you kind of act as a liaison between the parents, teachers, staff, students to the principal. So, you're kind of like the bridge between the two. I would say that originally, when I came into the role, I didn't really know what my role was. It's vague, and I think it changes depending on what district you work in and what are the issues that that district is faced with at that time. I think the primary focus for assistant principals is discipline. We deal with a lot of student and school climate and handling any sort of policy changes with discipline codes. And so there is a lot of work around student engagement and staff engagement, and then ensuring that the building is safe all of the time. I would say that the difference between an assistant principal and a principal, like I said before, it varies depending on where you work. At least at our school, the difference is it's very minute because my principal sees me as a peer, not necessarily as a subordinate. So we have a very good working relationship, but I would say the difference is she is more focused on our school's vision and mission, our curriculum, the instruction, where are we going as a school? So, my role is to keep the peace while she does the hard work of trying to figure out how to improve student achievement and grow student scores. And so I'm on the ground. That's what I would say. I'm on the ground all day long, keeping the peace while she's behind the doors doing the meetings and trying to, figure out next steps for where we're going as a school. And I'm like, how do I explain that I'm the custodian, the nurse? Like, it's like, so to become an assistant principal, and it varies state by state. So in the state of Connecticut, you have to earn a bachelor's degree first to even get into education. So you can become a teacher without your master's degree, but the expectation is within 5 years of starting as an educator in Connecticut, you would have started your master's program. And so even prior to becoming an assistant principal, the expectation is you have a bachelor's and a master's program. And then after that, the expectation is you receive an O92 certification. And so that's about 18 credits. Many people choose to do the 6th year program, and part of that is because you do get a pay bump if you do go for the 6th year. In education, your pay a lot of the times is aligned to the number of credits you choose to increase over time. So the more classes you take, the more money you make. It seems kind of like an oxymoron because you have to spend money to take the classes, but when you compare it to over time, you have to look at it over time and, are you going to make that money back plus more over time? And then honestly, many assistant principals, at least in my district, and principals in my district are pursuing a doctorate. Like I am enrolled at Fordham University and I'm starting my EDD in educational leadership this August. That's not a necessity, but it's definitely becoming more of a norm, especially within the New England area, as far as especially if you're choosing to pursue principalship or working at the district level as a superintendent, assistant superintendent, director of curriculum. So I actually originally was in business. I went to Manhattanville and Purchase, New York, and I was I wouldn't say I was lost. I just didn't quite know what I wanted to do. And so I did business because it seems like the most overarching degree program to fall into. And then I actually did import for US Customs when I first graduated from college because I was interning with them. So I wound up getting a job right out of school. And I didn't enjoy it. I mean, it was a job which was great and it helped me pay my bills and start paying back my student loans. But I knew that's not where I wanted to be. And so I worked with Manhattanville's Office of Career Services. And that's kind of how I started to look into school counseling. And then for school counseling, you have to have a certification in school counseling. So you have to have your master's. And so that's how I decided to go for my master's. And then that's how I got my certification to be a school counselor. No, assistant principals is not a solitary profession. You don't necessarily need to be an extrovert, but you definitely need to have some, I would say, EQ skills, emotional intelligence skills, people skills, because you are working with people 100% of the time. And then even when you're solitary, you are working with people via emails or whatever sort of, like I said before, discipline stuff. So you have to deal with what they wrote on paper and try to make sense of that information and how you're going to handle it. Um, I would say at my school alone, we have 157 staff members. I have 1,050 plus students. So you times that, let's say roughly half of them have both parents at home. That's not the case all the time, but in some cases. So on top of that, you have about 2,000 parents you're dealing with. Um, so yes, working with people is essential, and reflecting on your own practices and how you interact with people is essential because we all make mistakes. I love the role that I chose for myself. And the reason why I would say that is because I feel that I have a larger impact on the society as a whole. By affecting change in one adult, that change, that positive impact will radiate for forever. So, each year a teacher can see anywhere up to 100 kids, a teacher, maybe a little bit more. So if you think about the change that I can have on one adult over time, it's so great that I can't even explain the magnitude of how powerful it is. Um, but in the same vein, it could also have the same negative impact. While you may not have that intention, that could be the impact. And so I think, you have to, as a leader, I think you need to spend intentional time reflecting on your own practices, analyzing or acknowledging what your core values are, making sure that everything you do is aligned with your core values, um, and staying true to that, and knowing that get comfortable with being uncomfortable, and you're no longer their friend, you are now their boss. And so when you don't get invited to like the staff party on a Friday, that's that's okay. They're not going to want to be your friend. You just need to make sure that you have respect and trust within each other so that then collectively you can make the change that you need to make. You remember, when you go into being a leader, it's not because you want to be liked. It's not the intent. The intent is you go in to be a leader because, well, I would hope that you choose this role is because you want to affect change, especially in education. You want to affect change amongst our most like vulnerable population, which is our kids. And so it's not about doing what's right for the staff. It's what's doing what's right for the kids. And sometimes that means you do have to make a tough decision that can hurt somebody's feelings. But if your core value is this is what's good for this kid, then if you stay grounded in that, I feel like that's how I put my head at nighttime on my pillow. Um, I would say actually all of the jobs that I've held have been useful to where I am today. I mean, I have been fortunate that I've walked away from even working at Joe's Video when I was 14 years old. That I walked away with some sort of, you know, skill that made me a better assistant principal today. Um, Even if it meant that I had a boss that I didn't necessarily agree with, then that was a model for how I didn't want to treat my coworkers and my employees. So I feel that every job has prepared me for today. I would say the job that probably has prepared me the most really is being a school counselor. Um, it's not common for a school counselor to be able to push through and become an assistant principal. So I will be honest with that. That's not always the norm. What you tend to see is more, classroom teachers who understand, or what the perception is they understand content and teaching, be able to access assistant principal positions more often than a school counselor accessing assistant principal positions. However, I would say that I was probably, and I'm not a classroom teacher, so I can't compare totally, but I would say that the skills of being a school counselor, as far as listening and sympathizing and empathizing and truly, understanding where a person is coming from, has prepared me for the hard work of being on the ground and communicating effectively with my colleagues and working with students in regards to discipline, and giving me like the patience and the tenacity to deal with some of the pushback, because you will get pushback. People will not like you. And especially if you're young, it's not always easy because many of your colleagues are older than you. And so, there's this mindset that you don't necessarily have the wisdom to be in the position that you are, to tell somebody who's been in the position longer than you have what to do. And so I would say that being a school counselor truly prepared me for this role, because it gave me, the self-regulation skills I needed, and organizational skills I needed, and so many others. I think one of the most important is almost intuition, or like a pulse, and being able to read the people in your school or in your office or around you. Um, you know, Everyone is walking in with something, whether it's something that's going on at home or something they didn't like the way you rolled it out or what you said. And so, a lot of the times those become obstacles and don't allow you to affect the change that you need to affect. And so, a lot of times we don't want to see it, or we ignore it because we're just like, oh, that person needs to deal with their stuff. Or we take it personal and we're like, they just don't like what I'm doing. So we don't address it. It becomes the elephant in the room. So I think it's critical that you as an individual are able to push aside your own self-esteem issues, and to really truly have a sense of, what are my people struggling with? Are they happy right now? If they're happy, why are they happy? What am I doing that's creating that? Or are they unhappy? What is it that I'm doing that's creating the sense of unhappiness? And being comfortable with asking, because when you do ask, they will share, especially if they feel respected and trusted by you, they will share. And that's only going to empower you to make a better change. So I would say you have to be intuitive and you have to be self-aware. Those are the two huge, to me, are the most important skills you need. Like, I'm like, you could do the textbook stuff, but if you don't have like the emotional intelligence pieces, like, you're not going to be able to roll out like any sort of program effectively if you can't like get people on board. And getting people on board is like the soft stuff. The only thing I could think of as far as equipment is honestly the walkie-talkie. It's the bane of my existence sometimes, because you're always connected. So, as an assistant principal in education, or as a principal in education, you're like the top person in command. So you have all forms of communication. You have to have your cell phone with you all the time. So between my cell phone, my Apple Watch, and my walkie-talkie, and my computer, and my iPad, I would say that it's a combination of technology. You have to know how to use technology. That is where we're moving, especially after, what we just went through with the pandemic. Technology is critical. You have to just be flexible with Excel spreadsheets. Excel spreadsheets need to become your best friend, because we are looking at student data all of the time. And so if you become comfortable with Excel spreadsheets, it will be much easier to really look at trends as far as how your student achievement is going, especially with discipline as well, to see if you're disproportionately suspending students. You need to look at spreadsheets, you need to collect data. And you just have to become okay with the fact that you are accessible 100% of the time, all of the time. There is no traveling for work. I can't speak to what it's like to work in a private education center. I've never worked in a private education center. So I can't speak to something I've never experienced, but what I can say as working in the public school, um, like I said before, it really depends on the district you work in, which is an unfortunate reality. I work in a Title I school. And for anybody who's watching this, when you get into education, there's a lot that has to do with funding, and funding that supports schools, and lack of funding that makes it very difficult for schools to affect change. I'm a Title I school, which means that 80% of our student population or more is low income, which means they qualify for free lunch, and we get funding from the federal government and for the state. However, we are the lowest per pupil expenditure in the state of Connecticut, which means of 169 districts, we pay the lowest of all districts by our taxpayers to fund education per student at our school. And so I would say one of the challenges in working in public schools is disparity from one district to the next as far as funding, and trying to make change when you have no money makes it very, very difficult to do what is right for kids. And it gets very frustrating. And I would say that at times it beats you down. So I'm never been in a private setting, but from what I gather, private settings tend to have a little bit more, well, surely a lot more funding than public settings do, especially public funded schools in low income areas. So there are many challenges when you don't have money. It makes it very hard. I mean, I would say that assistant principals make decent money. I mean, we're no Jeff Bezos or anything, but we definitely make a decent living. Um, I think it depends on obviously like where you work and the cost of living within your state. But I would say, yes, I cannot complain about my salary. I definitely have a decent salary. I'm able to afford my mortgage and pay back my student loans. And so, yes, I would say that it's definitely a significantly higher pay raise than what I was making before as a school counselor as well. Stereotypes people may have about educators is that we have the summers off, and we have like this amazing job because we only work 7 to 3, and we have the weekends and spring break and summers off and winter break. What people do not see is all of the work that happens after 3 o'clock. So a teacher or an assistant principal or is in front of their students from 7 to 3, but after that they have to plan for the students for the next day. So that could be hours. What people don't see is most of us work 6 days a week, maybe 7 days a week, because they start planning on Sundays. What a lot of people don't realize is the demand from society that if they email a teacher or an educator, that they get a response within 24 hours. And so, that's been hard. That's hard because you want to make sure that you're not that educator people talk about, but at the same time, you also want to find a balance between like work and life. And so it's not always easy to face the pressures of what society feels about teachers. Um, that is definitely difficult. I think my favorite thing is, being able to support a teacher in their classroom and seeing how that positive support like creates the infinite number of students beyond that moment. That's one of my favorite things. I would say one of my other favorite things is this position allows me to know all students um, in a very different way, which I love. Um, it also gives me an opportunity to know a lot more about educational policy, and has really opened up my eyes to what is really going on in our society. And I feel privileged that I have access to this information now, that I'm able to know more and learn more about budgeting. So I feel like now that I have the information, now I'm empowered to do something with it. And so it's kind of like a double-edged sword, but those are my favorite things about education, about being specifically an assistant. So one of the, I guess, downfalls with being an assistant principal, I mentioned this before too, and I think it comes with just being a leader in general, is you are now at a position where you're expected to have answers. And you're expected to lead people who are following you. So you need to stay on top of the game. Like, so one of the downfalls is the pressure is hot. It's hard. It's not, people are not going to let up. It is constant too. They're as much as, yeah, it never ends. So that is one of the hard things, is that the pressure is never ending. And sometimes it is harder than others. So while it's great, it could be hard and stressful at the same time. In the middle school world, we have this thing that people who work with middle schoolers never leave middle school, because you have to be a special human to work with middle schoolers. Um, they come in as sixth graders, like little babies, and the little fish in the sea. I don't really know who they are and what they want to be. And then by eighth grade, they're kind of like a high schooler, but not yet. So they still kind of need you, but they also can have like profound, awesome conversations with you about who they are and where they see themselves going. So in this very short 3-year period of time, you see these people like morph. It's like, um, but it's hard. They're a lot of identity stuff, trying to support them through their sexual identity and gender identity, is not easy navigating that. More specifically, not easy navigating that with parents who see that age group still as very young, but in reality, they're not very young. So it's a tough time. It's a tough time because they're not elementary and they're not high school. So it's almost like, do you, for lack of a better way of explaining it, do you treat them like juveniles or do you treat them as adults? That's really where it is. But they're funny. They keep me young. That's such a loaded question as far as what I wish somebody would have told me before I came into education. I mean, I think what I really wish I would have known, and I still don't know how prepared somebody could have made me for this, but how hard it is to make meaningful change. The red tape in education is serious. Um, the the navigating the the norm in education is serious. Um, the trying to push the needle and maintain your job in education is very serious. Education is extremely unionized, which in many regards is great, but in some regards it's not. Um, so if you're somebody who really likes to like make change, and you're an advocate and you like to see change happen overnight, this may not be for you because it takes a very long time to see the hard work that you're putting in pay off. And you may never see that. And you may get pushed out because of it. So that is something I wish I knew more about. So I don't know if educating administrators are allowed to know what a work-life balance is, especially during a pandemic. There is no life; it's only work. I did not stop working since like August of 2020, and this is my first time I've stopped working. So I pretty much have worked like 18 months straight with no days off. um, I think you can successfully have somewhat of a work-life balance depending on how diligent you are as an individual. And so, saying that, me specifically, I get to work really early in the morning so that I could focus on prepare on what's happening. So, for example, I get to work at 6 o'clock in the morning because the kids come in at 7:30, and teachers tend to start coming in between 6:45 and 7. So I like to at least get my day set up before anyone knocks on my door. Because also, as an administrator, you are always supposed to be available even when you go to the restroom, because anything could happen and you are supposed to be available. So I get there early, I stay late. I have accepted the fact that while I love to eat healthy, I can't always cook for myself. And so I pay somebody, this sounds ridiculous, but I pay somebody to make me healthy lunches and healthy dinners so that I can still eat healthy, but also work. You're gonna have to bend. Some of it is gonna have to happen in order for you to be available. And add a family to that. I'm married, add a family to that, and it makes it much harder. But yes, you are on all the time. That is a hard question because it's not something that you can create prior to doing it. But I would say if you're someone who is comfortable with a stress level from a scale of 1 to 10 being anywhere between an 8 to a 10 on a daily basis, if you could see yourself almost working, I guess the best way I would explain it is if you could see yourself working in an emergency room in like the most populated area ever, but with one of those like Tasmanian devil hats that has a spinner and it has multiple colors. And so somebody just spins it and you go from dealing with discipline to doing a teacher observation to being a nurse because the nurse didn't show up and you need to give a kid their diabetes medicine, um, to having to clean up the cafeteria after the kids' lunch because one of your custodians called out. So if you can see yourself being at that stress level almost all of the time with wearing a hat that changes positions on the fly, then that is for you. If you are somebody who needs to know exactly how your day is going to go, and you cannot deal with any sort of diversion from that, then no, this is not for you. So for me, when I shifted careers, I took one of those career tests. And while it was seemed really dorky at the time, it was totally like spot on as far as like what was right for me. And I feel like you could fight that. Like you could fight it for so long until eventually like your personality is just your personality and the career you should work in is the career you should work in. Um, but in addition to that, I would have to say that I think you need to also have just like a moment with yourself. Like, what are you really looking to do? Or are you somebody who wants to have a very lavish lifestyle with a lot of money? Because then not every career path is going to line you up for that. Are you somebody who is, comfortable with making an okay salary, but really wants to find a job that is only a 9 to 5 and doesn't extend beyond that? Then I think you really need to figure out first like what are you prioritizing in life, what do you want out of life, and then I feel like that can then help you translate it into like what is the best placement career wise for you.